Welcome to yet another in this series of foreign policy conversations hosted by the Perth US Asia Center. Today, I am particularly delighted to be joined by Richard Maude. Richard is the Inaugural Executive Director for Policy of the Asia Society Policies Institute. I think he needs no introduction to viewers here in Australia. Richard previously served as Deputy Secretary for the Indo-Pacific Group in the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. He was in that role, responsible for the Holo Government task force, which supported the preparation for the Australian foreign policy white paper in 2017. Previously, he served as the Director General of the Office of National Assessments, and then has a long and storied career in public service prior to that, in the Office of the Prime Minister and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and in the Office of National Assessments. And so we're delighted to have this opportunity to discuss recent developments in the region and the world with Richard. Thank you for making the time.
It's a pleasure, Gordon. It's lovely to see you again, even if at this great distance. And Western Australia is one of my favourite states, and this is as close as I'll get for the time being. But let's hope I get over there in the not too distant future.
Well, things are looking better than they have in the last couple of months, and we're certainly looking forward to the chance to meet directly. Richard, I see the Asia Society Policy Institute banner beside you. I would note that you are the first senior official of the Asia Society Policy Institute outside of the United States. Most of our viewers won't be as familiar as I am with the Asia Society. As you know, I spent 25 years in Washington, D.C., during which I frequently made pilgrimages to the Asia Society home ship there in New York City. Could you just start off by telling us a little bit more about the transition you're making from a career in government to the Asia Society Policy Institute, what your goals and objectives are, and what you're hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. Well, I think, I sometimes joke to people that much of my career has been about serendipity, and ending up working for Asian Society was definitely serendipitous. I had decided after a very long period of thinking about it and talking to my family that I would downsize my career, and I had given everything I had for a long period of time, and that had come at a fair amount of cost to families, and I'd really felt that the time was to make a change. And just really about the same time, Asia Society and the Asia Society Policy Institute in particular were looking to expand. As you said, there really have been up until now a New York-centric organisation. They have some very senior and very capable people who will be known to you, people like Danny Russell and Wendy and so on, with a strong focus on North Asia and on trade and economic issues. But the opportunity came for them to establish this little outpost in Australia, and I was very pleased to be able to do so. I'm double-hatted, really. Part of what I do is write for the Asia Society Australia outfit, mostly on Australian foreign policy. But I also do some work that resonates with the Asia Society Policy Institute's global audience. And in particular, they're quite keen for me to focus on Southeast Asia, because that's a part of Asia that they've done less on in the past. And that's really a pleasure for me. I wouldn't say I'm a deep Southeast Asian expert, but I have spent a lot of time, of course, in Southeast Asia. It's a region I love. I've done 2 postings there. So I've written a bit, for example, on Southeast Asia and COVID. And at the moment, I'm working on a project that tries to draw some of those strands together, the various effects of COVID on Southeast Asia.
Well, the Asia Society Policy Institute is fortunate to have you there, and we're fortunate to have just another voice pushing and promoting the importance of developments in the region to domestic politics here in Australia, and obviously in that context, Australia's role in the world. For those of our viewers who don't know, the Danny and Wendy, who Richard just mentioned, is Danny Russell, who is a former Assistant Secretary of State, served as Senior Director for Asia in the National Security Council in the White House, really one of our foremost Asia specialists in the United States. And Wendy Cutler, who served as Deputy U.S. Trade Representative, one of the chief negotiators behind the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and in her current role as head of the Asia Society Policy Institute office in Washington, D.C., has been one of the leading voices for free trade and the institutionalization of free trade in an era that has seen some retrenchment. So great partners for you to have and for us to have in that context. Well, Richard, if I could turn to one of your most recent responsibilities, and that was shepherding the Holo Government approach, which led to the 2017 Foreign Policy White Paper. I recall at the time when the idea was first floated and while it was being developed, and there was some skepticism about whether or not you could do a foreign policy white paper because the pace of change was so fast. And when the report finally came out, I think there was a tremendous sense of recognition that you had kind of hit the spot, by focusing on the Indo-Pacific as an organizing structure for how we view Australia's role in the region. That's something that we at the Perth US Asia Center, having championed it for the better part of the last 7 years, welcomed. And it was extremely right for the time. And yet, in the blink of an eye, we're 3 years on from that. You wrote an op-ed just a couple weeks ago where you revisited that experience. And if I get the quote right, you said that at the time we were missing what's happened right now, which is a toxic mix of foreign policy challenges that were either absent or still distant objects at the time of the 2017 white paper. I wonder if you could kind of lay out your argument a little bit further. Is the 2017 effort still relevant today? And what recent developments do you think that we need to factor into our efforts to make it still relevant today?
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. Look, I think it is still relevant, and you don't have to take my word for that. The government itself has said it's still relevant. If you look, for example, at the submission that the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has made to the current parliamentary committee inquiry into the way in which COVID has changed our external environment, the department has said that the 5 big priorities in the white paper are still relevant and important and core parts of Australian foreign policy. And of course, as you say, any big official policy document like this is inherently vulnerable to being overtaken by events. I reckon in the current environment, 3 years is a very good run. I'm pretty happy with that. But look, it's a statement of the obvious, but not just has our external environment continued to change very rapidly, but it's also materially deteriorated over that period of time. And I think that's the key point. When we looked at the environment, you were very kind about picking the moment or nailing it. We knew it would be folly to try and predict the future. What we tried to do is look at some of the big forces that were shaping the world, the drivers of change. And I do think, I suppose I would say this, I do think that we got them right. But all of those big forces and trends have continued to move on, I think, much more quickly. They've gone further and faster than even we might have imagined at the time. And if you think about the things that are on plate, that's true of the challenge from China. I think it's true of American unilateralism and unpredictability. It's definitely true of China-US competition, of economic nationalism and populism, the challenge to globalization, the weakness of the multilateral system. And of course, now, on top of all that, we've got the COVID-19 pandemic and a really and truly smashed global economy. So it's this pace of change combined with the deterioration in our environment that suggests that it is time for an update. It's those two factors that drove the update to the Defence White Paper that we saw launched a couple of months ago. And I think the same should hold true for the White Paper. We're dealing with even higher levels of uncertainty and risk, and achieving those high-level objectives that the Department of Foreign Affairs says are still important for Australia, and which is set out in the White Paper, they've got harder again. And to sum all this up, the White Paper had a kind of catchy 3-word phrase for our current environment, which I must credit to my co-colleague in the White Paper, Justin Hayhurst, which is that we were dealing with a world that was inevitably going to be more contested and competitive. And when the PM stood up and launched the Defence Strategic Update, he described the world as poorer, more dangerous, and more disorderly. And I suppose that sums it up pretty well.
Yeah. Well, we're fortunate in that Western Australia seems to have a little bit of a lock on the position of Minister of Defence. Just a couple months ago, we had Minister of Defense Linda Rendles out here in our first back in-person event, launching that 2020 Defense Strategic Update, and had in the room 3 former ministers of defense, all resident here in Western Australia. So I think I couldn't agree with you more in terms of the recognition of the fundamental shifts that led that update in the process being equally relevant to the foreign policy arena. And you've already laid out several of the specific areas that I'd like to carry on in this conversation, because they will require rethinking in any update that takes place. And the first, obviously, is China. Obviously, that was a major focus of the 2017 effort. You, in your forward-looking 3-word synopsis, rightly recognized that the era would be more contested. And I think we've seen that come true over the last 3 years, probably in no area more than in our relationship with China. However, I would note that as tempting as it is to look at the Australia relationship with China bilaterally, it's really important to realize that we are not alone in experiencing this era. Whether you're Japan or Korea or Vietnam or the Philippines or India or the United States or Germany or the UK or Canada, we're all dealing with that increasingly contested era in our own ways in the process. So I wonder if you might just help us think through that most, and this at this point, preeminent of Australia's bilateral relationships, how we got to where we are today, and how you think we ought to deal with the contested era vis-a-vis our relationship with our largest trade partner.
Yeah, well, great question. No easy answers, of course, to that one, Gordon. But I think, you can perhaps see the white paper as one of the last moments when we were still talking about the possibilities of a different kind of relationship, a relationship that would never really ever live up to the title of comprehensive strategic partnership, but one which would still have some positive dimensions to it, where we would engage on issues that were mutually beneficial. And of course, really, it's all been downhill from there, in the sense that the relationship has become much tenser and much more difficult to manage. And we can track that time, and you can, and people do argue about particular policy decisions or particular the management, the public management of particular policy decisions. But really, from an Australian perspective, the main problem is that China has continued to become more assertive, it's become more authoritarian. Our 2 systems have moved much further apart, and we've now got this much sharper clash of interests and of values. And we have a China that is willing, and has indeed sought to punish Australia for policy decisions that Australia believes are taken to respond to Chinese behaviour. So whether that's 5G or foreign interference or direct foreign investment, or indeed our Indo-Pacific strategy, these are all actions that Australia is taking to protect and advance interests, and China regards Australia as becoming hostile to its rise, and it seeks to coerce us to change our course. So it's not so hard to analyse that. It's harder to think about what to do about it. There's an awful lot of noise in the system now, as I'm sure you know, Gordon. Every day there's a new drama, wall-to-wall media coverage, everyone has a view. I think if you try and step back from that, the really central question for governments and policymakers here is, what is the best that we think we can be achieved with today's China? What actually is the art of the possible? I think that's a genuinely hard question to answer. We've never faced a challenge quite like this one. And of course, we're not without agency, but the future of the relationship rests on decisions made by China as much as, and perhaps more than, ones that we'll make. And also, as you, I think, alluded to, what other countries do is also important, and particularly what America does is important. And we've got a problem not just of a rising power clashing with an established power, a China that inevitably wants to reshape regional and global order to better suit its interests. But we've also got a problem of a ruling party that sees itself in a struggle to death with capitalism and democracy in which it must prevail. And of course, a system that's increasingly totalitarian in nature. And so if you believe that's an utterly irredeemable situation, that we're doomed to live through a period of intense and dangerous confrontation between the US and China, that will spill over into our region, and that China is neither willing nor able to change its behaviour, then from a bilateral perspective, you could be forgiven just for wanting to batten down the hatches, doing what we can to harden ourselves and take our lumps on the economic relationship. And any management of the relationship in that scenario is limited and defensive in nature, and our aspirations for it will inevitably be limited and defensive in nature. And we're kind of close to that point now. I, however, am not quite ready to concede that that's our inevitable fate. I just want to make a couple of quick points here, Gordon. One is about the context, and particularly about how the US responds to China's challenge. I still think there's scope for the US to shift tack from an approach that has some things to recommend it, particularly the commitment to compete with China, but which ultimately I think is less of a strategy and more a series of whacks to the head, and shift towards what some people, including Kevin Rudd, for example, call managed strategic competition. And that's not going to be a walk in the park by any means. It would be tough and multi-dimensional, and it would be still challenging for Australia to navigate. But if that could be achieved, there'd be, I think, a greater chance of the US-China relationship operating within some mutually agreed red lines, and for there to be some space for cooperation on challenges like climate change. And that would give Australia, I think, a bit more space in its own relationship. And for us, and I suppose this is my one bit of gratuitous advice for any government, I do still think, Gordon, that there's room for a sense of proportionality about the challenge from China. It's very significant, but as I've written elsewhere, I don't think it is so severe yet that it must subsume all other Australian national interests. So foreign interference, for example, is real, it's corrosive, we have to deal with it, but the fabric of our society and our democracy are not about to come crashing down. And similarly, in our region, China has great advantages, but as people like Peter Varghese have pointed out, China's never going to be powerful than the US, Japan, India, Australia, and Vietnam, so on put together. So we have something to work with. We shouldn't be fatalistic about our future. There remains scope to pick our fights on occasions, and rigidity of foreign and domestic policy here, I think, is going to be our enemy.
Well, not to disregard your very wise urging of proportionality, I'm wondering if I might kind of take you down a slightly less proportional avenue of this discussion, just because it is so prevalent in our discourse. Just this week, we had, with the opening of the UN General Assembly, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, warn against a coming Cold War, about the bifurcation of technologies and systems, and highlighting the risk of potential conflict between the United States and China. You're absolutely correct, whether it's the media or not. There is real concern about what has thus far been tension in the trade and diplomatic space spilling over to tension in terms of a hot conflict. And whether it's the South China Seas, or increasingly over the last several weeks, concerns about cross-strait relations, Taiwan, there is a real concern that this will move from, again, the economic or even the hypothetical to a more kinetic confrontation. You obviously, in addition to your role as a diplomat, had a long stint strategically as an analyst at the Office of National Assessments. How real should the Australian public see the potential of a conflict being?
Yeah, I think it is worrying. I don't think it is likely. I don't think either China or the United States wants it. But as you say, things are very tense at the moment. We're in for a long period of competition that's inevitable. And there is a risk that China and America could stumble into a conflict. So while it's not likely, I think it's not as remote as it once was. And the Australian government has really already warned of that possibility. If you, again, to go back to the Defence Strategic Update, it does talk about this possibility, about the possibility that the Australian Defence Force will need to be better prepared for what rather euphemistically they call high-intensity conflict. And the thing I think that really worries me is not that this is an implausible scenario, but that occasionally in the Australian debate, it's raised with a degree of matter-of-factness. Oh, conflict might be coming, so let's prepare. Well, we should prepare, but of course, any conflict between the US and China is exceptionally risky. If it's not contained, if it escalates, it could be strategically and economically disastrous. And we really can't afford an accidental conflict. And, you know, often in the debate on this, there's a reflexive response that, well, okay, America and its allies, we can't back down or afford to appease an authoritarian power. But I think that's kind of missing the point. We're not really talking about backing down. What we are talking about is the need to be really smart here, very calibrated, and not forget the lessons of history. And Taiwan is a really good example. Bill Bishop, as you know, in his cynicism letter, he's one of the best of the American China watchers. He wrote the other day that Taiwan is the reddest of red lines for China. And the domestic drivers here of Chinese behaviour are immense, and they could overrule common sense. We already know that Xi Jinping has less patience for the status quo than his predecessors. So our job is to do what we can to maintain international space for Taiwan and to deter Chinese aggression, and do our best to do so without actually providing an excuse for that aggression. It's a fine line to walk. I think we're on the right side of it now, but given the mood in the US at the moment, the run up to the election, the risk of something going wrong, we just have to be vigilant and not treat it as something that, oh, we just have to get ready for, but something that we have to try and prevent if we possibly can.
Well, obviously, there's another side to that whole discussion, and that is our longstanding ally, the United States. Longstanding in terms of alliance, but it has been, shall we say, somewhat different in character for the last 3.5 years under President Trump. By the time this conversation is shared with our broader community, we'll be less than 40 days out from the US election. You have, in your writings, indicated the importance of this upcoming election for the relationship. I wonder if you might take us to the other half of that conversation. So, you know, what is at stake with the U.S. election, and if you would so venture, without trying to pick what the election result might be, what would be the implications of a Trump victory, and on the flip side, what would be the implications of a victory by former Vice President Joe Biden?
Well, first point to note is that I don't get a vote, neither does anyone in Australia. It's a decision for the American people, and the Australian government will, of course, work with whoever is sitting in the Oval Office next year. I do worry personally about 4 more years of President Trump. You know, one gets the sense that he will feel thoroughly and utterly vindicated and triumphant, and the few kind of personal and institutional guardrails that exist on his foreign policy instincts will be removed. And I think we'll see a doubling down on the narrow nationalism of America first. We'll see more unpredictability. I think we'll see a faster unraveling of global order, a faster loss of confidence, including in Asia, in America. I think we'll probably see China-US relations continue to deteriorate, and a very significant degree of at least technological decoupling and possibly some broader economic decoupling. That's all going to be pretty challenging for Australia to manage. The alliance will remain, I think, very important. The institutional links there, the military to military links, the bureaucratic links will stay strong. it remains very much in Australia's interest to maintain the relevance and the strength of the alliance, and we will keep working away at it. We will continue to be great friends of America, but we're going to disagree more on policy. And as I've written, I think that inevitably we'll probably have to hedge more against this unpredictable America in the region, including by doing what we're already doing in effect, which is really investing as much as we can in our direct and independent relations with our key Asian partners. If Joe Biden wins the election, on paper at least, I think how he describes his foreign policy will better suit Australia's national interests. There's no going back to the Obama era. His foreign policy team have been pretty clear about that. So, we will continue to see, I think, a tough competition with China, and Australia wouldn't want it to be any other way. We really need America to compete with China. But I think there'll be an effort to lead on a better version of America itself, lead on the basis of American values. The Biden camp has already said they'll put a lot of effort into repairing alliance relationships because they see this as one big advantage that the US has that China doesn't. There'll be more tolerance for the vagaries of the multilateral system and for America that keeps commitments it makes. And I think importantly, there'll be a big investment in a renewal of America's own domestic sources of strength, particularly its democracy. I think all of that will be good for Australia. There will be some challenges. The Biden election campaign has been very heavily influenced, as you know, Gordon, by the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. There's a very ambitious climate change agenda, and the Australian government could expect to find itself under pressure there, I think. There's a very big and very expensive domestic economic agenda, which will obviously suck up a lot of time and attention. And to some extent unfairly, I think, but at times the Democrats have had their own sort of confidence problem in Asia, and you will have seen a few people in Asia speaking out either publicly or anonymously about concerns that if Joe Biden is elected, that a Democratic administration would not pay sufficient attention to Asia.
Well, I'm one of the few Australians by dint of my dual citizenship that actually does have a vote. And I have to say that you're far more measured and balanced in your assessment than I would be. And that's probably to the benefit of those who are watching this and wanting to get a good understanding of it from an Australian national interest perspective of the issue. Can we turn now to the Indo side of the Indo-Pacific? You earlier on just referenced your ongoing work in and deep interest in Southeast Asia. The broad construct of the Indo-Pacific in some ways was underpinned by economic integration. The notion that 30 years ago, the economic center of gravity was unquestionably Northeast Asia. With the rise of China over the last 30 years, it has shifted southwest. We certainly hope for the continued rise of ASEAN, of Vietnam, and Indonesia, and India, which means that economic center of gravity will continue to shift along that Indo-Pacific axis there. That whole vision is laid out, again, clearly in the foreign policy white paper 3 years ago, is now being challenged by not just the China-US divide we've spent the last few minutes talking about, but by the impacts of COVID-19, which is not just obviously a health crisis, but one that has kind of upset trading economies, the economic health of countries, the trajectory of countries. I wonder if you might address how you think COVID is going to impact this region and some of the underlying assumptions behind the region that underpinned the foreign policy white paper.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. I think, of course, the main consequence for the region is that all the economies have been hit really, really hard. Now, China itself is emerging from that, and it's really the only major economy that's growing at the moment, even if that growth itself hides some structural weaknesses. but everyone else has been hit really, really hard. If you have a look, as I have done recently, for example, going back to Southeast Asia at some of the second quarter economic results there, they're really pretty shockingly bad. Economies that are plunging in the double digit, ranging between 12, 15, 16, 17% going backwards. India, of course, has been hit incredibly hard. And so this is a massive blow to the region's economy, to its lost GDP that these countries are never going to get back. A big hit to poverty. So this remarkable story we saw in Asia of reduction in levels of absolute poverty. The pandemic and the economic effect are pushing more people back into poverty. And on top of this, there's still a very long way to go for some countries to have the pandemic anything that looks remotely under control. So we'll continue to have these rolling outbreaks, this grappling with the pandemic and the impact that has on the region's economies. So the region's going to be poorer. It's going to be more distracted. The job of rebuilding domestically will mean there's less time for thinking about the region. And Australia really needs to grasp that reality and factor our own foreign policy into it. And everything we can do to help at this time, I think, will pay dividends in the future. And to their credit, the Morrison government and Foreign Minister Payne have been doing some things to help. We've re-geared the Australian aid program around COVID-19. I'm sure you and your listeners have seen the contributions that Australia is making to a program designed to ensure that regional countries can get access to vaccines as they are developed. I think that's all good and positive. On the downside, despite really this dire need, the aid budget remains flatlining. So some additional money has gone into the region, but it's been taken from elsewhere in the aid budget. We haven't seen a single dollar added to the aid budget. And I really just think that that's inadequate. And now is a moment, despite our own domestic economic problems and higher debt, of course, to grasp the nettle and do something that captures the imagination, like John Howard's $1 billion contribution to Indonesia in the wake of the pandemic. Putting that aside, of course, the other big thing that we've seen across the region is China's wolf warrior diplomacy and its very assertive stance on really all of the friction points in the region, on the border with India, around the Senkakus with Japan, in the South China Sea. And that squandered an awful lot of goodwill that its medical support for the region has done. So all in all, where does that leave us? Well, I think a couple of quick points. One is, I think these relationships are as critical as ever. And when you think about the range of plausible future scenarios for the region, the one policy that works for us in all of them, the good, the middle ones, and the really bad ones, is Australia investing in Asia. And we just have to keep doing it. It requires a high degree of political commitment, and it requires the resources backing it. Second point is, there is, I think, a degree of convergence in this, in the sense that the interest is not just Australia's, it's not just one-sided. These countries are, for the most part, also interested in doing more with us. Part of that predates COVID. They've been feeling the same pressures of a changing region, changing balances of power, the contested and competitive, to go back to that phrase, nature of the world. They're looking to diversify their own relationships and add ballast to them. And then post-COVID, China's assertive, aggressive diplomacy has accentuated that trend. So there's more opportunity there. The record over the past couple of years is pretty good. If you look at the things that we've gotten done with partners like India and Indonesia and Vietnam, Singapore and Japan, I think the track record is good, and we just have to keep doing more of it.
Richard, given the breadth of your experience, my temptation is to go down a laundry list of issues I want to get your views on, from transition in Japan to North Korea to what's going on in Hong Kong to obviously India, Vietnam, etc. But I think our viewers might be best served if, to wrap up this conversation and to be respectful of your time, we bring the conversation back to Australia. You have several times, again, referenced that notion that the future, which is now, is going to be contested and competitive. And one of the implications for Australia of that contested and competitive environment is that we need to rethink our own approach and strategy. Part of the discussion that has come out of that has been a heavy focus on supply chains, on our relative sovereignty, the risks that are in that process, and our own ability to reduce our exposure to a relatively small group of commodities economically and a relatively small group of economic relationships. And so you won't be surprised that in the 7 years of the existence of the Perth US Asia Center, our mantra has been diversify, diversify, diversify. You will also not be surprised to know that 7 years after our creation, Australia's economic relationships in the region are less diverse, both in terms of country and in commodities, as we've pursued a tremendous economic opportunity. It seems that the tensions that you have discussed between the US and China, the concerns about US leadership, concerns about Chinese activity, coupled with the impact of COVID, have led the Australian public and even the Australian business community to look at that question of diversification with new eyes. So could you just take a second now to wrap us up by thinking about Australia's place in the world? Maybe this is just setting a roadmap for whoever decides to pick up the marker that you've laid down and revisit a foreign policy white paper. How are we positioned? What do we need to be doing right now, looking at this changed world, the contested and competitive world, from an Australian perspective?
Well, just on the economic diversification question, which is where you started. Well, first, kudos to you and your colleagues at the Centre for illuminating these issues with very influential research, which is very helpful. I wish there was an easy answer to the diversification question. In a normal world, whatever that is, the structure of our trade that you identified wouldn't have mattered because it really just represents demand and comparative advantage. But, we are in an era, I think, where to the extent we can, greater diversification is going to make us more resilient. And of course, it reduces risks in the China relationship where, clearly parts of the trading relationship are going to be regularly at risk in the future. Part of the answer to the relative underperformance is that the complementarities that we have with China just aren't as strong in some of these other Asian markets. Part of the answer is that doing business in some of these Asian countries is just not easy. So, as you would know, Gordon, economic nationalism is a very strong force in India. It's a strong force in Indonesia. There are many barriers to trade. Sovereign risk can be high in these countries. And it really comes down to doing a couple of things. First, there's a long, hard game of trying to reduce some of those barriers. And that's why India's decision to opt out of RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, was, I think, so disappointing. And then on the Australian side, companies and businesses, I think, can do more working together to open up new commercial opportunities in Asia. And as it happens, coincidentally, more or less at the same time, both Asia Society and Asia Link have put out reports in the past couple of months that try to look at this question and offer some really practical advice for companies and governments about what they can do individually, but also in a joined up fashion to try and open up these new opportunities and exploit the growth that will come back to Asia. And, there's still a better chance that growth will come back more quickly and more strongly in Asia than in other parts of the world. So look, that's one thing we can be doing. There are many others in multiple policy dimensions, and another reason for having, I think, an update to the white paper is that some of the specific policies in the white paper are already changing. I didn't really cover this in any length in the op-ed, but for those who are interested, there's a longer version of the paper on the Asia Society Australia, where I track through some of the changes that are going to be made. I think, you know, to try and keep this short, a lot of those policy ideas are about greater resilience. They're about hardening ourselves, and they're about protecting our sovereignty. The trick, I think, in doing them is to do so in a way that imposes the least costs necessary on our society, the least cost economically, and the least cost in terms of developing frameworks, legislation, new rules that, for example, limit Australia's openness to the world, or cut off investment that we actually need, or overgear domestic responses to a particular challenge from China. I think that's the key, one of the key challenges that we have to get right as we go forward.
Richard, unlike you, I've never served in government. I spent 25 years in Washington, D.C. in the foreign policy think tank community there. And for the last 7 years in Australia, I've been keeping the streak alive of never having had a real job. But we are actually fortunate to have your level of experience in government, in strategy, in analysis out in public. The Asia Society Australia and the Asia Society Policy Institute are fortunate to have you kind of sharing your views as we work our way through what is clearly going to be not just a contested and a competitive era, but one in which the government alone can't provide all the answers. So we appreciate you taking the time to do this interview today. We're confident that those of our community here in Western Australia who are not familiar with either your recent work that we'll provide a link to on the Asia Society website, or your broader work will be interested in it, and we'll share this very broadly with our community throughout the Indo-Pacific. So once again, thank you. We look forward to working with you and your colleagues as we continue to wrestle through this era. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Gordon. Look, it's an absolute pleasure, and you know, these foreign policy challenges are immensely difficult. No one has a monopoly of wisdom on them. They require, I think, a degree of humility, actually. And so, you know, the more we can challenge each other and share perspectives and dig deep into these issues, I think the stronger Australia is going to be positioned to deal with them.
Well, until we can meet again in person, this virtual exchange will have to do. Look forward to the next time in person. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Gordon.